Okay, thank you all. I'm Alex Moehring. I'm a PhD student in the IT group, and I'm excited to share my job market paper, Personalized Rankings and User Engagement and Empirical Evaluation of the Reddit Newsfeed. So let's dive on it. So I want to start by noticing that a common feature of many of the largest social media platforms today is that the platform has access to nearly unlimited pieces of content, while each individual user only has a finite amount of attention to allocate to the platform. So as a result, the platform by necessity has to curate content for its users. The most common way this is done today is by the platform generating a ranked feed. And oftentimes these feeds are ranked in such a way as to optimize for predicted engagement. So the platform is promoting content that it thinks that you will click on, comment on, reshare, etc. And at a high level, my job market paper is going to ask, what is the impact of this decision to rank content by predicted engagement on the type of content users are engaging with? To be a little bit more concrete, I'll be thinking of a setting very similar to this, where users encounter a ranked feed of news articles about US political news. Users will then comment and discuss these articles in comment threads. So when I talk about engagement today, I'll be talking specifically about the decision to comment on these articles. And then a key feature of the content that I'm going to be interested in is going to be a publisher's credibility rating. So this is meant to capture an aggregate summary of the journalistic quality of an outlet. You can think of more credible publishers as having fewer failed fact checks, higher quality of sourcing, among other things. So at a high level, I'll be asking, what is the impact of the decision to rank content by predicted engagement on the credibility of news content that users are engaging? So to motivate this exercise, I want to share this quote by Mark Zuckerberg, which I think captures the sort of widespread belief that less credible content is more engaging online. So Mark says that one of the biggest issues social networks face today is when left unchecked, people engage disproportionately with more sensationalist and provocative content. He goes on to say the category they're most focused on is clickbait and misinformation, which would certainly be examples of low credibility news content. And then closes saying that people consistently tell us this type of content makes their services worse, even though they're engaging with it. So to summarize, Mark is saying that less credible news content is more engaging, at least on his platform. So it stands to reason that if we apply an engagement maximizing algorithm on top of such a setting, this is exactly the type of content that's going to be promoted. And fundamentally, this will be a claim that I'll be testing empirically today. So now I want to share sort of my more specific research plans, or sorry, research questions, and give sort of an outline of the paper. Recall I'm building up to answer the question of how do different ranking algorithms impact the type of news content users are engaging with. But a key ingredient to this is just understanding how influential the ranking algorithm is at steering attention and engagement to promoted articles. So another way of saying this is I'm going to try and estimate the causal effect of rank on engagement. And I'll do this using a regression discontinuity that's based on the platform source code. I'll tell you about that in a couple slides. Second, I will want to understand users' heterogeneous preferences to comment on different types of news publishers. So I'll estimate a micro-founded choice model. Users will visit the platform. They'll be exposed to a subset of articles that's determined by the ranking algorithm. And then they'll have sort of heterogeneous preferences to actually comment on the articles that they're exposed to. And then I can use these sort of first two ingredients to tackle the first research question of substance, which is if engagement-based rankings are promoting and inducing users to engage with less credible news publishers. So I'll be able to use this choice model to simulate and estimate engagement patterns under counterfactual ranking algorithms. So I'll be able to ask, what pieces of content would users have engaged with had the platform been using something like personalized engagement maximization. Finally, I will evaluate the cost to the platform in the form of foregone engagement of optimizing for something different. So rather than optimizing for total engagement, we can think about what would happen if they optimized for a weighted combination of engagement and engagement with high credibility publishers. And I'll trace out sort of the efficient frontier between these two possible objectives. So what do I find in 2024? I think, this isn't surprising. Ranking algorithms matter a lot. People have heterogeneous preferences online, particularly on Reddit, the community I'm studying. What I think is maybe a little bit more surprising is when we think about engagement-based rankings and the impact it has on publisher credibility. I find for the majority of users, things actually seem to work pretty well. Engagement maximization induces these users to engage with a slightly larger share of high credibility publishers as a result. However, for a subset of users, some of these concerns that Mark Zuckerberg alluded to appear well-founded. So for these users, engagement maximization induces them to engage with a substantially larger share of low credibility publishers as a result. Finally, when we think about sort of the trade-offs faced by the platform, I find what I think is a pretty optimistic finding for managers in that for a modest cost in terms of foregone engagement, the platform can substantially increase the share of that engagement with high credibility publishers. So it seems like they have a pretty effective tool to kind of manage this trade-off. Okay, so now let me quickly tell you about the empirical setting and the data I collect. I'll then sort of tell you about my identification strategy and the reduced form results before talking about the choice model and the counterfactuals. Okay, so as you might have guessed, I'm going to be studying Reddit, in particular the Reddit politics community. This is a community where users share and discuss news articles about US political news. If you were to visit this platform, you'd see a ranked feed of these articles, not unlike this screenshot at the top of the page. I'm going to argue it's a really nice setting to study these sorts of questions. In the interest of time, I'm not going to tell you why, so you can just trust me that it's the ideal setting. And then I'm going to sort of collect data of 3 different types. So first, I will want to observe at various points in time the state of the feed. Okay, and so this includes the position of various articles, the number of votes an article has, the number of comments an article has, et cetera. And so to obtain this, I'm going to scrape historical snapshots of the subreddit feed from the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine. And this will allow me to observe sort of all this information, as well as some other helpful data. I will second need a measure of user engagement for an outcome. And for this, I will merge in a data set of user level comments. This data set is amazing. I think we'll hear more about it this afternoon, but it contains a near universe of comments submitted to the platform. It has some nice features. I observe the timestamp of every comment, so I can isolate the comments that occur immediately following each of my snapshots. This will be how I sort of form the outcome that I'm most interested in. And second, I observe the user ID of the user who submitted the comment. So I observe repeated decisions by the same user over time. And so when I am estimating this choice model and thinking about preference heterogeneity, this will allow me to be somewhat flexible in the heterogeneity that I embed. Finally, I will merge in a few different publisher features. This will include both a measure of a publisher's political slant, how preferred a publisher is by known Democrats to known Republicans, as well as a measure of the publisher's credibility rating, which again is sort of a summary of its journalistic quality. Okay, quickly I want to tell you about how I estimate the causal effective rank on engagement. I'm going to take advantage of Reddit's historic transparency, where they actually, until 2017, maintained an open source mirror of their source code. It's kind of nuts if you think about it, but it's great for us researchers because we can actually go and inspect the algorithm that's used to rank articles. It's a very simple algorithm. It combines the age of an article with the number of votes that article has received to create a ranking score, and it just sorts articles according to its ranking score. I can recreate this ranking score and then sort of leverage this continuity, which I'll explain in a second, to estimate this or to identify this causal effect. So what I'm plotting here on the x-axis is the difference in a focal article's ranking score with that of an adjacent article, and the y-axis is the probability of focal articles ranked lower on the page. This is the first stage. This confirms that Reddit is ranking articles according to this algorithm we've reconstructed. We can use this to estimate the treatment effect on actual engagement that occurs in sort of a window following each snapshot. So that's what I'm showing here. My label's disappeared, which is fine. On the x-axis, we have the different positions on the feed. So on the left here, it's position 1. On the far right, it's position 25. And the y-axis is the log number of comments an article receives in a window following each snapshot. So to interpret these points and give you some numbers, the point on the left is saying the local average treatment effect of an article being promoted from position 2 to position 1 is about 40%. And then each of the other points are the local average treatment effect of being marginally promoted by one position. Okay, so this is how I identify position effects, which will be a key ingredient of the choice model, which I will now discuss. So here I'm going to model users' engagement decisions in a pretty simple discrete choice framework. So users are going to comment in this model if 2 things are true. First, a user has to be exposed to an article. This is modeled as an independent Bernoulli draw, where the probability of exposure depends on the article's position. So this is how position effects are captured in this model. Second, condition on being exposed to an article. For a user to comment, their utility from commenting has to exceed the outside option. This is a pretty standard logit setup. In the interest of time, I'm not going to talk about how I estimate it or identify this model or anything. The reduced form treatment effects allow me to pin down the exposure parameters, and then I'll use sort of the panel nature of the data set to identify preference heterogeneity. But great, now that we've estimated this model, we can talk about some counterfactuals and estimate what type of content people are engaging with under counterfactual ranking outcomes. So I think this figure here kind of summarizes the first main finding of the paper. Here, what I'm plotting on the x-axis is the share of a user's engagement with high credibility publishers under Reddit's existing baseline ranking algorithm. And I'm plotting the same quantity on the y-axis for 3 counterfactuals of interest. So the first thing you'll notice is the blue and orange dots are right along the 45-degree line. This represents a random algorithm and a non-personalized engagement maximizing algorithm. This suggests that these algorithms don't have much impact on the composition of users' news diets. What's maybe a little more interesting is the line in green. This is a personalized engagement maximizing algorithm. And this has a sort of kind of nice S shape. And so what this tells us is that users on the right who are already engaging with pretty high credibility publishers, they continue to do so. Users on the left, however, they're engaging with more dubious publishers at baseline. They see a pretty substantial deterioration, sort of the quality of their news diets. So this is what I meant at the outset when I said that engagement maximization is pushing users apart along this credibility dimension. Second, this is sort of the second main result, I think, and I'm about out of time, so I might have to go over this a little bit quickly. But I consider a series of counterfactuals where rather than optimizing for total engagement, we're optimizing for a weighted combination of total engagement and engagement with high credibility publishers. We can vary the weight put on total engagement. Here I'm summarizing this analysis. The x-axis is plotting the share of the average user's engagement with high credibility publishers, and the y-axis is plotting total engagement normalized to 1 at its maximal value. So the top left, we have personalized engagement maximization. We take the weight on credibility all the way to 1. We get a credibility maximizing algorithm, and then we can, of course, consider interior values of that weight put on publisher credibility. The one thing I'll say here before I conclude is that the shape of this frontier is very important. So what you'll notice is that, at least locally, around the personalized engagement maximizing algorithm, this frontier is very flat. Okay, and so what this tells us is that, again, at least locally, for small costs in terms of total engagement, the platform can substantially increase the share of engagement with high credibility publishers by including publisher credibility in the ranking algorithms. I'll maybe conclude here in the interest of time. Just to recap, my objective was to try and understand the platform's trade-offs when they are optimizing their ranking algorithms for for engagement. The two main takeaways are, first, that I find that engagement maximization exacerbates the differences in the quality of users' news diets. And second, that managers have sort of this valuable tool in the form of some of these credibility-aware algorithms to try and manage this trade-off and increase publisher credibility for a modest cost. So thank you. Sorry, I went a little over.